Name's Mark. Welcome to this webinar. So there we go. I have a book coming out called The Sigil Secret, and it's about sigil magic. So let's go to the first page. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself first. My name is Mark Smith. My pen name is Mark Vincent. I am a clinical hypnotherapist. I've been practicing professionally since 2008. So 13 years, 12 years, quite a long time. I'm also a professional drummer. I have two teaching studios. I've been professional for 25 years. And I am what's known as a chaos magician. So my kind of occult preference is a strain of the occult called chaos magic. Chaos magic is a very sort of eclectic way of practicing magic. It ties in really neatly with hypnosis, behavioral psychology, that kind of thing. And sigils originate, or modern sigil magic originates from the chaos magic movement. Don't worry if you don't know too much about that. I'll explain a little bit as we go along. I also use the drums to teach anxiety management by teaching people how to recognize when anxiety is coming into their body, and how to address it. And the drums, believe it or not, are a really good way to induce anxiety in a controlled fashion. So as you've got me here today, and you've got me for the next hour or so, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and I'm going to have a little Q&A session at the end, the last 10 minutes, and Edith will pick some questions out and read them to me. Please don't hold back. If you think your question is a bit weird, remember where you are. You're in a webinar about chaos magic and sigil magic, so ask away. So where can you find me on the web? Well, the sigilsecret.com is the website for my book, The Sigil Secret. If you go there, if you make a note of that, and go there after this webinar, there's a free guided meditation download called the Chaos Chamber that we want to give to you. And the Chaos Chamber is a guided meditation to help you uncover your true intent in any situation. So one of the most difficult things about being or working with sigils is finding out what you really want in the first place, and this meditation helps you do that. In addition to that, we've put together two free pre-prepared sigils for clarity and procrastination, as they tend to be two things that come up an awful lot when people are talking to me about things that they want. So the Chaos Chamber is my personal blog, and my booking site as well. So for one-to-one sessions, anything like that. Okay, so in today's talk, I'm gonna go through a few points with you, and hopefully sort of answer some questions afterwards. Firstly, I'm going to talk about what are sigils, because I'm assuming most of you have limited or very little idea of what they are, and where they come from. I'm going to talk about what they're for, so what you point them at, and the kind of applications that you have for them. And then I'm going to give you a brief overview of how they work, what makes them work. And then we're going to get into the really fun bit, which is how to make your own. And I'm going to teach you a thing called the Austin Osman Spare method. It's worth making a note of his name and doing a bit of Googling on him afterwards, because he's really kind of the father of modern sigil making. And then I'm going to talk again a little bit more about what makes them work. And I'm going to give you a model to think about your mind, because sigils are a really good way of influencing your unconscious. And then we're going to have a little Q&A. So as you think of questions as you're going along, just type them in the Q&A box at the top, and I will do my best to answer them at the end. And if you have any urgent questions, put them in there, and Edith will interrupt me, and I'll answer your questions as I'm going. So, what are sigils? I've kind of given them three broad categories, I suppose. So traditionally, when people are thinking, especially in an occult context or angel magic, something like that, they are symbolic representations of entities, spirits, demons, angels, that kind of thing. And in the bottom left corner here, you can see some goetic sigils lifted from a medieval grimoire called the Lesser Key of Solomon. And you can see around the outside of these sigils the name of the spirit that's being invoked. Now, depending on what you believe, some people believe that these sigils have inherent power themselves, and that the sigil literally represents the presence of that spirit. So they're used in what is called ceremonial magic, which is what most people think of. But people generally think of two things when they think of magic. They think of like witchcraft magic, dancing around a circle, and Maya, which is pagan. Ceremonial magic, which is a guy in a black robe sitting in a room in a circle conjuring demons using these images, and that's where these kind of things come from. In the top right of the screen, you can see what's called a planetary sigil. So this represents a planetary intelligence. If you're interested in planetary magic, each one of the planets of the solar system has a magic square associated with it, and you can use the magic square to make images to represent aspects of that planet to get it to do things for you. They're the ones I like the look of the most. I think they just look cool. Sigils are also used in branding. So the Nike tick is a sigil. It's a symbolic representation of a particular brand, and it's designed to evoke a particular kind of emotional response. And it also has very often in corporate settings, which we're not going to go too much into here. In corporate settings, it has a logo attached to it. So Just Do It is Nike's one. The McDonald's arches are a form of a sigil, so you have associations with them. They have meaning. And the one we're really concerned with here today are when sigils are used as symbols of magical power and intent. So the ones some of you may be familiar with are runes or hex marks. And in the bottom right corner there, you can see some Norse runes. And these are used more in the traditional sense of casting spells, used for warding, keeping demons out, that kind of thing. So these are really the ones that I'm going to concentrate on, and the ones that the type of sigil that the book mainly focuses on.
Mark, can I just
yes.
break in for a second? Because Timmy
Sure.
answered an interesting question regarding to your previous slide.
Sure.
On the direction of the energy flow. So he's asking, is it clockwise or anti-clockwise that you turn the circle, the turning of the circle?
In what for a sigil?
Yeah. So on the direction of the energy flow, is it clockwise or anti-clockwise?
So that depends on your belief system. So if you were, so I don't use that kind of thing at all, because I'm a chaos magician. We don't really, well, I don't see sort of energy being inherent in the sigil. I think it's doing something in my mind. I'm going to go into that in a little while. If you were a Wiccan, for example, you might use them in a ceremony, and then you would go Deosil. I think that's clockwise around the circle to put energy into it. But as you'll see as I go along, the approach we're going to use here is an eclectic approach. So you kind of make up the rules for yourself. So, okay. So what do they do and what are they for? Well, really the ones we're talking about, these kind of power sigils, they allow you to manifest things that you want. And in a chaos magic context, what they do is they allow us to do that by bypassing your doubting mechanisms. So they're really, really good for sneaking past the bit of your brain that tells you can't do things or you can't have things. This is because your conscious brain works in words and your unconscious works in symbols and images. They allow you a way of directly communicating with your unconscious to direct it to change. Again, so because your unconscious doesn't really understand words as such, sometimes talking to it in English or whatever your native language is doesn't get it to do things, whereas sigils are a good way of getting around that. The other thing they're used for is, as I said earlier, to represent spirits and entities for conjuration, which is more of a ceremonial magic thing. In chaos magic, we sometimes make our own entities and that kind of thing, but I'm going to stick more with the unconscious influence today. So what makes them work? So I use what is known as the psychological model of magic. So that means that everything's happening up here. So I'm using sigils to influence the direction my mind takes, things it notices, and to particularly to prime a bit of it called the reticular activating system. Now, this is a really kind of long phrase for something that's actually fairly simple. It's like a reality filter. It's a bundle of nerves in your brainstem that sorts information out, and sigils are very, very good at priming that to look for things that you want it to look for. So it's very good at pointing your unconscious at things that you want. Because they are images, they're very, very good for circumventing your doubting mechanisms. They're very, very good for situations where you feel like you want something but don't feel like you deserve it or don't know how to get it. In addition to that, the process of making the sigil uses, so the ritual around crafting the sigil that I'm going to talk a little bit about is used to create new belief systems and to join emotions to ideas to create real world effects. In my world, idea plus emotion, you put the two together, you get reality. And sigils are really good for altering one or two of those vectors in your brain. So how do you make your own sigils? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what's called the Austin Osman Spare method. So the Osman Spare method was invented by Austin Osman Spare in the early 20th century, I believe. And it's all around what's called sigilizing a statement of intent. Okay, don't worry if that seems like gibberish. I'm going to explain it in a second. It's about knowing what you want the most, turning it into a magical image, charging the image, and then forgetting it. Now, the most difficult thing, well, there's two things about the Spare method that are difficult. The first one is knowing what you want in the first place. And the second one is forgetting that you wanted it in the first place. It sounds extremely simple, but it's very hard to do. So in the book, The Sigil Secret, I've written down a protocol, which we named the Protocol of 6x3, and it's a series of 6 questions that you ask in sequence over and over and over, and it helps you to drill down to what you're actually after. The thing that makes a good magician is the ability to tell the difference between what's really happening versus what you think is happening and acting accordingly. And once you know the difference between what you think is happening and what's really happening, you can use sigils to kind of nudge probability to get the outcome you most desire from that situation. So once you've chosen your statement, the thing that you want the most, you need to shrink the statement down and then turn it into an image. So we've called this chaosizing because it's quite a good singular way of describing it. So what we're going to start with is my favorite statement of intent. It makes sense to me, if you're going to work with sigils, that the first sigil you make is a sigil that makes your sigils work. So the first statement I always get people to work with is my sigils work. So that you don't have to continuously keep thinking about getting them to work in future. And actually the initial process of making them is extremely simple. You take your statement, my sigils work, and you take the vowels out. So one of the reasons we remove the vowels is to simplify the statement down. So we're working with fewer letters. One of the reasons it's the vowels particularly is because I believe in Hebrew there are no vowels. So we kind of borrow from that tradition and use that as a way of shrinking everything down. So if you notice, immediately you've gone from a statement that's recognizable to your conscious brain, my sigils work, to as soon as you remove the vowels, it starts to become less recognizable. The idea being here that all the way through this process, your unconscious remembers what's happening. So it kind of links. I don't count Y as a vowel. There's a bit in the book. Ooh, hang on, press the wrong thing. I don't count Y as a vowel. It doesn't matter if you do or you don't. And we talk about that in the book because there are times when you can use it, but generally I don't count it as a vowel. If you want to, that's fine. You can take it out. So what you'll notice is by looking at this second line here after we've removed the vowels, it's basically, to your conscious mind, it's gibberish. It's starting to become metaphorical. It doesn't really mean anything anymore, but your unconscious kind of retains the meaning of it. And then you remove the duplicate letters. So again, the reason we remove the duplicates is to reduce the amount of letters we're working with, to have fewer letters because it's simpler. And then again, what you're doing is you're removing conscious recognition all the time. So you're stepping away from the initial statement into something, and then further down into this chain of consonants. So your conscious mind looks at that and doesn't really register it anymore. It kind of knows what it means, but it's starting to lose its meaning. Your unconscious remembers all of it. So that's the first stage. You have your statement, you remove the vowels, and you remove the duplicates. There are lots and lots of different ways of doing this, but for the purposes of today, I'm going to keep it fairly simple. And I'm going to suggest once you've done this, you go away and try it for yourself, and do it exactly as I tell you to start with. So we craft the remaining consonants into an image. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop my screen share, and then I'm going to share the whiteboard. And I'm going to take you through it in real time, so you'll see it being done. You'll also get the joy of me attempting to write letters out using the trackpad, which is always entertaining. So I'm going to write them in capitals. So the statement we're going to start with is my sigils work. Okay. So we then take that statement and we remove, now I'm keeping the Y for the minute. Oh, we remove the consonants. We remove the vowels. So we've only got the consonants, and then we remove the duplicates, okay? Which there's only one, it's only the S that gets repeated. That's the biggest danger for me every time I do this. If I get carried away or stop paying attention, I leave duplicates in, that kind of thing. It doesn't really matter as long as you kind of follow it as closely as you can. And what I'll do actually to show you the difference as well, I'll take the Y out as well, and I'll show you how they would look slightly different. So what I then do is I take this string of consonants here with the vowels and the duplicates removed, and I make an image out of it. So I start with the M like this. Now, when you're doing this, you want all the letters touching each other. So when you are chaosizing it, as we call it, the reason you're doing it, so I'm putting the S in here, and then I'm going to put the G here. And I'm going to take the L and put it here. Now you'll notice also that some of the letters are upside down or backwards. That doesn't matter. Like that. There goes the W. I'm going to put the R here. And then I'm going to put the K here and attach it to there. Okay, and there you have a sigil. Very, very simple. You have your statement of intent, the thing you want. You remove the vowels, and then you remove the duplicates, and then from the remaining letters you craft an image. And then to finish it off, seal it in a circle, like that. Nice and easy. So depending on how experienced you are, how far you want to take it, you can double circle it and put magical words around the outside, but for now that's a basic way of doing it. Okay. Once you've done that, this is where you can use your own artistic expression, your creativity, your intuition, whatever you want to use to kind of take it and kind of edit it down, if you like. Now, when I'm doing this kind of stuff, I tend to use the first one that comes out. I like to say it's because I'm efficient. It's probably because I'm quite lazy and like things to work quickly. But let's say, for example, you found that a little bit too busy, a little bit too messy. What you can do is you can kind of take the theme of it. So if I take this middle bit here, and I like that bit there. So I'm taking kind of the center bit. I like the top bit. I'm going to keep that. And I'm going to keep that line here. And then draw the L off the side. So you can see it looks similar. And then I would, let's see if I can enclose that without, I probably can't. Oh, well, that'll do. Hang on, let's see if I can do a bit neater. As you can tell, I'm not an artist. There we are. So again, sealed. So you can see that I've taken the theme of the first one. I kind of kept it in the second one. So why would you do that? Well, sigils work on how you feel towards them. So if you feel like they're going to work, they're more likely to work. So it's a good idea to kind of take some time to get an image that you like the look of. But additionally, what you're doing is creating distance between this initial statement and what you end up with. So your conscious mind can recognize this bit. Stopping being able to recognize this bit, we're into gibberish territory here. And then when you craft the image, there's no way your conscious mind can doubt that. It's not possible. Okay. So again, statement of intent, remove the vowels, remove duplicates, craft it into an image, and then edit it down. Okay. What I suggest you do to start with when you try this yourself is just do it with pencil. Start really, really simple. I mean, I've been doing this for years and I still just use a pen and paper when I'm doing it. If you want to get really creative with it, you can use paint. I've had students do oil paintings, all kinds of things. It depends how far you want to go with it. Just for your interest, I'll just make one very quickly with the Y removed so you can see the difference. And you don't have to do the letters in order, so I'll do them backwards. I'll start with the K and then the R. I'm going to put the R there. I'm going to attach that there. W. The only thing that's worth doing is making sure that they're attached, purely because your brain can't recognize them as letters when they're attached. Put the G all the way around here like that. L there. S. And then the M. Like that. Done. Okay. So it looks, because it's got less, I don't know, it's got fewer kind of columny letters in it, I suppose. You get a slightly different sigil just by taking the Y out. So that's an example of how it would look different. What you have to do here is if you make different variations, if you look at these three, pick the one you like the look of. And that's the one you would use. And that's really how you tell. When you're sort of crafting the sigils, it's aesthetic, it's occult, and it's art. So you pick the one you like the look of, you pick the one that speaks to you the most. But the process is incredibly simple. Statement, remove the vowels, remove the duplicates, and then make an image. one of the things that people worry about with this kind of thing, I'll take these down now. One of the things people worry about quite a lot with these things is this idea that they're going to do it wrong. And it's actually incredibly difficult to do it wrong because it's such a personal thing. I'm going to say it's impossible to do it wrong, actually. So the thing I would advise if you're interested in this kind of thing is just start making lots of sigils. And you'll start to see them work. And, you know, take that statement from today, my sigils work, and make lots of sigils for it. So if you're interested to know more, again, if you go to the Sigil Secret, the guided meditation, the Chaos Chamber, is there to help you kind of uncover your true intent, to help you make that statement in the first place. And there's 2 free pre-prepared sigils for clarity and procrastination. It'll kind of give you a view of what it looks like when somebody else makes them. And again, on my personal site, the Chaos Chamber, if you have any questions you want to ask after this, or something comes up a week later and you're not sure, you can always contact me on there and ask questions. And I have a blog on there where I'm going to be talking a lot about sigil crafting and getting them to work. Okay, so how do they work? Well, I've talked a little bit about this idea of bypassing the doubting mechanism, that your conscious mind doesn't really recognize images as well as your unconscious, and that you've seen there kind of a mini trail from statement to consonance to image, that you're moving away from this conscious ability to think, oh, I can't have that, or I can't do it. So I think it's useful for you to understand in the model that I'm using, which is the psychological model of magic, what they do. So I'm going to give you a way to think about how sigils affect your mind. Now, this isn't the be all and end all. There's lots of different models for the conscious and unconscious, but this one's my favorite. So a lot of the time when you see a model of the conscious and the unconscious, you'll see an iceberg, and the submerged bit under the water is the unconscious, and the bit above the water is the conscious. I've never been a big fan of that, mostly because the iceberg doesn't do anything. So I thought for many years about how to represent it, and eventually kind of came up with this idea of I wanted to represent the unconscious as an active entity. Very, very powerful, very, very old, very, very self-determined and bestial, animal-like, because it largely is a part of us that is animalistic. So I decided to represent it as a mammoth, because mammoths are massive, they're incredibly powerful, they're quite fixed in their trajectory when they move, and they're quite hard to get to change direction if they don't want to. As you've probably all experienced, getting your unconscious to do things you wanted to do is quite difficult. The rider, the little guy on top in the coat, is your conscious mind. So that's the bit you call you. If you want to put it in a sort of positional context in your brain, the mammoth is the limbic system. So it's right in the middle. It's the emotional center, and where the amygdala is the fear center. It's very primal. The rider is at the front. It's the human bit. Now, if any of you have read a book called The Chimp Paradox, Professor Peters uses a chimpanzee and a human. So I like the mammoth. It's a little bit bigger, and also the mammoth is a little bit more benevolent, because your unconscious is trying to help you all the time. Sometimes it doesn't seem like it is, but everything your brain does is to try and help you. And so, but sometimes it needs a nudge, and sigils are a very, very good nudge. So it's 2 separate systems that interact. The rider is the slow thinker, the analyst, the person. So the rider looks around and it takes everything in and it analyzes. Is hopefully the bit you're using at the moment. You're watching the screen, hopefully listening to the sound of my voice, paying attention to what I'm saying, trying to remember it all. Whereas the Mammoth is a fast thinker, it's reactive. Now, the key thing to remember is that they are two separate systems. They actually join quite late on in the womb. And so it's very real to say that there are two of you. And once you kind of come to this realization, it's much easier to understand why a lot of the things that you do, particularly the ones that you don't like, happen. So you're kind of understanding the rules of the game, as it were. So the Mammoth is completely reactive. It's animalistic. It's very quick, and it's very primal. Whereas the rider is much slower, much more considerate. Now, looking at that, I think it's fairly obvious to see which one is in charge. And if any of you are thinking the rider, it's not. The way I think about this and the way that magic is performed and the way you influence your unconscious is that you persuade the Mammoth to do things that you would like it to do, you being the rider, rather than forcing it. Usually where people come unstuck is that they hit the Mammoth when it doesn't do things they don't want it to do. Sigils are a really good way of talking directly to the Mammoth using a language it understands. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the rider. So the rider is analytical. It's the bit you use in school. It's the bit that can read. It's proactive and it thinks very, very slowly. So it has creative imagination. It has the ability to plan ahead, mostly because it's aware of linear time. So it understands today, yesterday, and tomorrow. It's able to plan for things and it's able to think ahead. And because of that, it's able to problem solve. It's mathematically literate, so it understands mathematics, which sounds obvious, but the Mammoth doesn't at all. It has no sense of it whatsoever. Most importantly, in this context, it understands odds, probability, chances of things happening. And it attempts to use logic and reason most of the time. Okay, so you attempt to use logic and reason most of the time. One of the most important things to understand about the rider is the conscious brain is extremely expensive to use. It costs a lot of energy. Thinking is hard work. And this is another reason we like to use sigils, because it allows us to communicate directly with the Mammoth in a more efficient way. Let's put it like that, because talking to your unconscious is hard work and it's difficult. I think that the thing to remember here is that sense of linear time and the mathematically literate bit. It understands the difference between today, yesterday, and tomorrow, and it understands things like probability. It's the bit that you call you. Without going too deeply into it, it's very possible that the rider is just a projection made by a different bit of the brain, but that's a whole nother long conversation that probably needs to be had over several beers, because it tends to make your brain turn inside out when you start to think about it. The interesting thing about the rider particularly is everything in your mind feels constant, but it's extremely changeable. One of the reasons you have the idea of you in the first place is because it's possibly a stabilizing projection. It's energetically expensive to use this bit of the mind. And I don't just mean magically energetically, I mean physically. It costs sugar and sodium, carbohydrates, to switch that bit of the brain on. That's why concentration makes you tired. And it hates uncertainty. Now, this is a universal characteristic of your mind. We live in an uncertain universe, and every single part of your brain absolutely doesn't like that and does things to avoid it all the time. Which is why in the giveaway we've done a sigil for clarity and procrastination, because the idea of having clarity is a great calmer. It can give the Mammoth particularly a sense of direction and give it a feeling of certainty. So the mammoth is what you would probably refer to as your intuition. It's a fast thinking bit of your brain. It's reactive. It doesn't plan because it can't. It has no sense of linear time. It doesn't know about today, yesterday, and tomorrow. It's only interested in now. It cannot calculate the odds, and like the rider, it does not like uncertainty at all. The biggest difference between the mammoth and the rider, aside from the lack of sense of linear time, is that the mammoth doesn't speak English. Well, it doesn't speak language. It doesn't understand. It responds to tone of voice, it responds to metaphor and imagery. And again, this is why sigils are so useful for talking to that bit of your unconscious. Because when you sigilize, when you chaosize something, when you take it and make it into an image, you're putting it in a form that that mammoth bit of your brain understands. It recognizes it, it knows what it means. Most of the problems people have in their lives come about when they try and use the wrong bit of the brain for the wrong thing. So if you try and use the mammoth to calculate odds, you're going to come unstuck because it can't do it. So it uses what are called heuristics to make rapid judgments. So these are like formulas, and it works on experience. Basically, it looks at what happened last time and how can I do it again. This is why you tend to repeat behaviors over and over again. It goes on what things feel like rather than what's actually happening. This is emotional thinking versus rational thinking. And it uses a thing called the availability heuristic, whereby it takes everything that's in front of it and adds that into the equation to make a decision very, very quickly. It's a machine for jumping to conclusions. And it's really good at it. And the reason it's really good at it is because being able to create a rapid picture of what is very, very useful for you staying alive. It's energy efficient, it's cheaper to use, it creates default systems that you call habits or beliefs. And whenever you get stuck, it defaults to those habits to make you safe, which is why procrastination is a problem, which is why getting clarity when you're emotionally clouded is a problem, because the mammoth takes over and does it for you. And it will do things in the short term that are destructive in the long term because it has no sense of linear time. So even though it's trying to help you, it can do things that are, let's say, not so helpful, almost by accident, because it has no sense of consequence. So it's why come out of a sort of an occult context for a while. People who stop smoking very often find they go back to smoking when they experience a period of great stress in their life. If they haven't had it explained to them what's going on in their head, that there's a separate bit that works on habits, that it will take over and default. And so what sigils allow us to do is to communicate directly with this bit, to kind of nudge habits in the right direction. I'm going to talk about a couple of instances where using the mammoth isn't so useful in your day-to-day life, because the problem with intuition generally is it's extremely useful, but it only works for certain things. So intuition works in social situations. So that's when you want to be using that intuitive bit of your brain. If you have a bad feeling about somebody, you should pay attention to it. Because that's the mammoth picking up on body language, signs, emotional signals, those kind of things, if it just doesn't feel right. That, by the way, is the bit that you use when you're choosing sigils. So you pay attention to how the sigil feels to you, and you use the one that feels good. Okay, it's very reliable at that. What it's not so good at is things like gambling. It's absolutely atrocious at it and can't do it. And you should not use your intuitive brain when you're gambling. It cannot calculate the odds. So you end up with a couple of my favorite fallacies, one called the hot hands fallacy, and it's from basketball in America. And this happens every time a player goes on a scoring streak. What happens is that as they score more and more, the betting on them goes up and up and up and up and up, because people watching are using their Mammoth brain and thinking, oh, well, he scored last time, he'll do it again, because it feels like he will. That's actually completely wrong, because the odds of him scoring remain the same every single time. It's a bit like when you flip a coin and you get 10 heads in a row, part of you will think, oh, the next one should be a tail, whereas actually it's exactly the same every single time. So this bit of your brain is no good for that kind of thing. And the gambler's fallacy is where people get it on fruit machines all the time, where they'll play for ages and they lose loads of money and they keep going because it feels like it's their turn to win in a moment. So that's the situations where you don't want to use that. When you are choosing which sigil to use, you absolutely do want to use it, because the Mammoth is the bit of your brain that performs magic. That's the bit that gets things for you. You just have to persuade it to get the things that you want it to do, again, using these two systems. The reason that it works like this is because being correct about things is completely unnecessary to your survival. Detail is much more extraneous than most people think. And so, for example, if you live on the savannah 40,000 years ago and you're running from lions and trying to hunt gazelle, you don't need to know exactly how many more lions have turned up. You just need to know that it feels like there's more of them. And that's what this bit does. And so if you find yourself, enacting repetitious behaviors that are quite uncomfortable, that's because the Mammoth's taken over. And so sigils work essentially by bypassing the rider. So we use the rider, the analytical, imaginative planning bit of the brain, to think about what we really want, and we analyze it. That's the first bit. And then we make the sigil, and as the process of making the sigil goes along, we use less and less rider brain and more Mammoth brain, until you end up with an image that the rider can't recognize anymore. So the rider can't interject and go, oh, I can't do that. He can't do things to sabotage it. And by the way, self-sabotage is kind of a mix of the two of those bits of your brain. It tends to be the rider overreacting to how the Mammoth feels. So you charge the sigil using hypnosis, or that's my favorite method to do it. We talk about this quite a lot in the book, different ways of getting it into the unconscious, and the sigil literally flies straight past the rider, straight into the Mammoth. The Mammoth recognizes the meaning of the sigil, and the rider cannot. And then the Mammoth enacts the instructions of the sigil. And that's basically how it works. That's how you get from your statement of intent, removing the vowels, removing the duplicates, and then using hypnosis. There's lots of different methods to charge the sigil, to kind of implant it into the Mammoth to get it to do things. Some of the effects can be quite profound. Most of the time you'll find the act of making the sigil itself starts to produce changes before you've even charged it. So it starts to produce alterations in unconscious behavior before you've even changed it. And some people get quite profound external effects. So I'm going to give you a little experiment to do in a minute that you can try on your own to sort of test this out and see it working. But whilst I'm explaining this psychologically, there's certainly an element to it, shall we say, where some quite cool and weird things happen. I had a drum student a few years ago who wanted a new bass drum pedal, this thing you play with your feet on the drums, and I asked him to visualize having it every day for a month, and then his parents bought him one out of the blue. So that's a form of kind of visual sigilization he was doing there. So I couldn't tell you exactly how that happened, but in my experience, once you start making these changes, things tend to fall in place around you, which is quite a cool side effect. So fundamentally, sigils work by bypassing this little guy on top and sending instructions straight to this guy who kind of gets on with it for you. So if that's interested you to purchase the book, you go to the Sigil Secret and you get your free guided meditation. So the Chaos Chamber is specifically designed to help you come up with a good statement of intent. And then in addition to that, we've got 2 free pre-prepared sigils for clarity and procrastination. As I said, they're the 2 things that tend to come up quite a lot. And they come back to this idea of helping you create a feeling of certainty. Once you have a feeling of certainty, things tend to get a lot easier. And then there's my personal site underneath. So I'm going to take some questions. Do we have some questions, Edith?
We do, but I just wanted to add that people do not need to buy the book to get the meditation for free.
No, they don't. Sorry.
Get the meditation.
Yep.
And the book will be published only in May. So.
Cool. Okay.
So we've got a few questions.
Okay.
Vicky is asking about, do sigils work only for yourself, or can you make the artwork and hang it in somebody else's bedroom, for example? And can they then also feel the energy of the statement?
Yes. So, okay. It depends. So fundamentally, it comes back to whether you believe that's the case. I generally don't do that, but I know people who do. So if you believe that it's going to have an effect on the other person, then it will. Because really what they are is expressions of your desire and expressions of your belief, basically. So yeah, that's I generally don't use sigils on other people. I can give you an example of a friend of mine who did, which was quite entertaining results. He used it for parking tickets. So he got sent a parking ticket, and instead of replying to the parking ticket, he sent them a sigil back in the envelope. And a couple of days later, the parking ticket was cancelled. So, this is what I mean by these kind of extra things that happen. To him, he believed that the shock of the person opening it and seeing the sigil would make it work. There is a mode of charging called memeing, which would come under this, where if you believe that the more people that are exposed to it and the more people see it, that gives it power. So it fundamentally comes down to what you believe underneath.
Okay, great. So I hope, Vicky, that answers your question. Then Aletta asked, can you make a mistake with the statement of intent? I mean, because you said you cannot do it wrong, but that's for the drawing part, but the statement of intent, can you do something wrong there?
So I don't like the word wrong. You are going to screw it up when you learn it because it's new. And separating out what you really want versus what you think you want is an art in and of itself. It's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I've been teaching a course on this for a long time. And the bit everybody struggles with is the first question: what do I really want? So it's not about getting it wrong, but you'll generally find it takes a few run-ups to kind of be able to tell what you're really after. So a big thing people say they want is money. What they don't address is the consequences of having the money. I'll very quickly give you an anecdote about that I usually talk about in workshops. There was a guy in the UK who won £9 million on the lottery. And he was a working class guy, and he worked on the bins, like collecting trash for the council. And he spent the whole lot in a year, every penny of it, on quite a fun time by the sound of it. Drugs, prostitutes and alcohol, partying with his friends. And he spent every penny of it. Now that seems completely insane when you look at it from the outside, until you realize that it wasn't him doing it. The Mammoth looked at it and went, whoa, hang on a minute, this money changes everything. So if you're a working class guy and you inherit 9 million quid, your world is flipped upside down. So his Mammoth brain panicked and got rid of the money as fast as possible. So kind of and that's where you have to pay attention to your intuitions around this stuff, and why it's useful to spend a lot of time thinking about what am I actually after here. It's what I call outcome-based thinking. Think backwards. So you can't do it wrong, but you will get it. You will make mistakes, and that's normal.
Okay, thank you. Then we've got a question from Mario Lang. Or not sure if it's a question, but is Mammoth the emotional brain?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the simple answer. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Anne Marie has a question. She wants to know if the book is obviously in English. Will it be in Dutch?
Yes, it will. Yeah. Yeah, it's published in English and Dutch, I think.
Yeah.
And it.
Yeah. And it will be out in the end of May.
Okay.
In both languages simultaneously. Okay, then Patricia has a question. Do you use one sigil for a specific amount of time? Can you do a different one every week? How does that work?
Okay, there's a couple of answers to that, so I'll try and keep it simple. To start with, if you're new to this, when you say, so usually what you would, in terms of giving them time to work, that's the first thing. You want to allow at least 3 months for them to work. So and there's several reasons for that are too long to go into here, but you want to sort of give it at least 3 months to work. You can make as many of them as you want in one go. In fact, generally, I very rarely make one sigil at a time. I usually do them in batches. It makes them easier to forget when you've done it. So also experiment with it. Start making them and see what works for you, because for some people, doing one single thing at a time works really well. Sometimes making multiple sigils works really well. The acid test is how you feel about it. So if you make the sigil and you find yourself fixating on it all the time, you probably need to go back and maybe make more of them or make different ones. If you make them in a batch and it feels overwhelming, that might not be right for you. So you've got to do a little bit of testing, try it out. But take the statement I've given you today, that my sigils work, start with that, and then make some other simple ones, start to play around with them. There's a good, I completely forgot to give you the test actually. Make a sigil to find small coins on the ground. That's a really easy one to start with. So it starts your brain looking for something inconsequential. It's almost impossible to doubt. Because you're not going to be emotionally attached to finding small denomination coins on the ground, and it'll be an interesting start point for you to see how it works. Hopefully that answers that one.
Yeah, great. Yeah, good. And I would like to add, I always have multiple sigils, also for me not to remember what they were about.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good way of getting around the fixating thing. You can't fixate on
if you just have the one, you'll remember what you made it on, and when your conscious brain will then go like, oh yeah, but that sigil's on that. So you activate the writer where you want to bypass the writer.
Yep. Yeah, that's the eternal problem.
Okay, so then there seemed to be a problem because the people were already downloading it. There seemed to be a problem just now, but I fixed it. So everybody who's not been able to download the stuff, if you can do it again, it should work. And if not, you will either way get an email tomorrow with the download link. So that should be okay. Then Anya has a question, and she wants to know how long the statement of intent should be, how many words or...
That's a tricky one. So it's kind of a balancing line between detailed and concise. So there's no word limit. Because of the nature of the removing the vowels and the duplicates, you're going to be shrinking the statement down anyway. So don't worry about it too much at the moment. If again, it comes back to this when you've written it out, if you apply your intuitive brain, use the Mammoth. Does it feel right? Does it feel like too much? If it feels like too much, step back and shrink it down. Yeah, it's not something you want to worry about too much, but pay attention to how you feel about it. That's what you're looking for all the time with that sort of thing.
Okay, great. Then Vicky wants to know what you do with your sigil after you've made it. Do you hang it up somewhere, or do you throw it out, or?
Okay, so that's a question with several answers. So I'll give you one that you can use immediately, and it's my favorite one, which is burn it. Take it outside and set fire to it, and then kind of just send it out. It's called the fire and forget method. So if you that's the simplest one to do. Once you've made the sigil, destroy it immediately and then forget about it, and do them in a batch.
Okay, great. And I would like to add that I sometimes just really like the artwork that I've done, so I will just put it up. And,
yeah. You can keep them. You can keep them
and just look at it, and just makes me happy knowing that it's going to work, even though I don't remember what it was for.
Yeah. And both of them work perfectly well. It's this thing where you have to try them out. Yeah. There is no single formula for this. It's just the principle that you have to go away with and try. So should we take one more?
Anita wants to know how you charge your sigils.
Okay. So
we might not have time for all of that.
That's quite long, and that's addressed in depth in the book. There's lots and lots of methods. So I will give you the simplest one that I can think of, which you'll be able to do. It's called. You can use a mirror to do it. You stick the sigil on the mirror in front of you and you stare at it, and you keep staring at it until it becomes physically uncomfortable to stare at it, and then you take it down and destroy it. So that's a really, really simple way of doing it. Effectively, what you're trying to do is reach a state of what's called gnosis, of which again is one of those weird, complicated things. It's a bit too long to go into at the moment, but the uncomfortableness of it distracts your brain from thinking about it, and that's how it goes in around the doubting mechanism. Tricky yoga poses can be used as well. That's another one. So if you put it in your line of sight and adopt like an inversion or something like that, your brain can't think about the sigil and maintaining the inversion at the same time, and it bypasses it.
Okay, thank you. Then Stephanie has a question. What is the difference between an affirmation that you keep repeating and a sigil or a statement of intent?
Okay, so they're similar, but they're not the same. They're like hypnosis and meditation. An affirmation is the realm of the rider, so it's conscious. So you're using language to reaffirm a belief. Sigils are the realm of the mammoth. So they're much more, they're directed at the unconscious. So whilst they look similar on paper, they're quite different in their sort of working mechanisms. And again, it comes down to which one you believe is going to work the most. You can, by the way, take an affirmation and turn it into a sigil and vice versa. So one of the reasons I like sigils is because if the mammoth doesn't believe affirmations, it just rejects them. So you can use a sigil to get the mammoth to believe your affirmation, for example. So that's quite a good way of doing them. But so the difference between meditation and hypnosis is unconscious. It's the mammoth. The rider goes to sleep. When you're meditating, you're directing the rider to look at the mammoth. And it's a similar difference between sigils and affirmations.
Yeah. And I think affirmations also have clear rules, whereas sigils, of course, you want to make a coherent statement of intent, but it's you can do different things than what an affirmation would be.
They're quite a broad church.
Yeah. So Aletta is coming back to the burning part, because she says, how can you use it for 3 months if you burn it?
No, you don't use it for 3 months. You give it 3 months to work. So once you've destroyed it, it starts to work. That's the difference. You don't need to physically keep it.
And so after 3 months, if it doesn't work, you do
it again. Yeah. Generally, so I'm a big fan of tracking what I'm doing. So I like to know that it's actually doing something. And as I said before, you won't get this right every time. Just, there's no kind of quote unquote magic formula for getting it to do exactly what you want it to do every time. There will be times where it doesn't quite work how you want it to, or you point it at the wrong thing. And 12 weeks is plenty of time to give it the ability to do what you want it to do. If you haven't seen anything by 12 weeks, you need to go back and look at it again.
Okay, great. So I hope that also answers Anya's question, that she says, so you have to give yourself 3 months for the result. Yes, she says that's answered my question.
Yeah, just the more time, the better. But so the reason I choose 3 months is because I think if something happens after, once you get over 6 months, you're in the realm of coincidence, and you want to actually be making sure that it's the sigils doing it, not just, you know, waiting for it to happen, if you see what I mean. That's why I chose that amount of time, but it's not, you know.
Yeah. And then I see Anita asking a question. If you make one, then your conscious will know what it's for. So I guess, Anita, that's, you know, that's why you make several ones, so you can't remember which one is which.
Yeah, if you only make one, I mean, that's the fire and forget thing is the most difficult bit of it. It's again, which is why I talk about this in the book quite a lot, this idea of making them in batches, or you can make several versions of the same one. But actually, if you're having a problem with that, make a sigil to forget your sigils. That works quite nicely as well.
That's a great one. Yes.
Very, very simple. I forget my sigils. Yeah. You know, that works for me to this day. And all this stuff takes practice, by the way. It's not, you know, you got to work at it.
Yeah. Okay. So one more thing about the email or about the download. So it's working now, but anybody who tried to download it earlier, I will just personally send you a mail in about an hour's time. So so that should work. And then I think we've got through all the questions, and
excellent.
it also we're running a bit late, so we're
okay.
We're doing great on time. And I don't know if you've seen the chat, but there's lots of people thanking you.
Good. You're very welcome. Good.
So yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much.
I see 2 more questions coming in.
Okay, I'll take them quickly.
Yeah, so Bettina is asking, what about the language you do it in? Do you have to do it in your own language, or? So
if you're bilingual, do it in the one you're most comfortable with. I mean, bilingual or more. Do it in the one you're most comfortable with. I think we were talking about this the other day, weren't we, Edith? You can use both. It doesn't matter. Your unconscious kind of remembers it. So, yeah, whatever you prefer. I've worked with students from all over the world, so it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Well, I think for yourself, it may be good to know that you're doing it in the language that you're most, or that is your best language, actually.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
It'll just give you more sense of a belief that you're doing it correctly, even though you say you cannot do it wrong, but
I don't like the word wrong.
Believe that you're doing it right.
Yeah, then sure. Yeah,
in language that works best for you.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to kind of bend the rules a little bit if your language doesn't quite fit the same structures as English. You know, play around with it and see what happens. There's all kinds of cool things you can do.
Great. Okay, well, I guess we're at the end.
Brilliant. Thanks everyone for coming. And I guess that's it. Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Bye.
Bye.